Good morning. Today is Friday, February 11th. It's 8:33 a.m. and this is the morning meeting of the Senate Natural Resources and Energy Committee. We're continuing our work this morning on Act 250, in particular, bill markup and discussion of S234. And we also have to, I think, a decision point with S200, the master permit bill. But as I haven't, we've had some testimony on S200, and I think, but the draft that we've asked people to respond to, and that we've put out a draft to respond to, was 234. And so I want to check in and see if sometimes the batting order is a little bit flexible. I don't see any representatives of ANR here at the moment. So Chair Haskell.
Brian Shoup is here.
That's
ANR, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry.
Okay, we have a lot of acronyms around.
Yeah, sorry.
I would be glad to represent ANR if the chair would like.
The part of ANR will be played by Brian Shoup this evening. Okay. All right, so Chair Haskell, you were here earlier this week. I don't know if you have any additional information you want to share, thoughts you want to share, as we've worked on the constructs that are in S234. And one of the things is that offline you had proposed some language, and I don't know if you want to share that with the committee or in order to advance the discussions in the room. So that really—
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to have to step into the next room. I'm going to go off camera. I will be listening in on the hearing and I will be back in a matter of a few minutes.
Okay, thank you. So Chair Haskell, the floor is yours.
Thank you. And good morning, Chairman Bray and committee members. For the record, I am Sabina Haskell, the chair of the Natural Resources Board. I've been here in this position since mid-December. Also with me today is Allison Stone. She's our Associate General Counsel, and I thank you for inviting us to discuss 234 with you today. I know the committee's heard a lot of testimony from a lot of stakeholders and from my colleagues at ANR and ACCD and AOT and others. I've also been able to listen in intermittently this week to that testimony. I wanted to share some thoughts with you. And Senator Bray, we can circle back on some of that language that you alluded to at the end, if that's all right.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. The administration and the legislature have discussed comprehensive reform for Act 250 over the last several years. And the governor's focus and emphasis right now, as we've chatted about before, is on strategies to expedite permitting for ARPA funded projects, IIJA funded projects. And that was why in his budget recommendations, he suggested that those projects will be prioritized in the permitting process, that they will be subject to shorter decision times. And he added 3 limited service positions to the NRB to ensure that those projects are prioritized. And I think we're all in agreement that nobody wants to leave any of the $1 billion-ish on the table. So that's in short, what we're saying is that larger and more comprehensive changes should be postponed until we have a strategy in place to prioritize those ARPA and infrastructure projects. I know that the discussion for updating Act 250 has been going on for the last several bienniums or biennia, which is more appropriate, but making decisions now with that $1.6 billion in federal funding on the line doesn't make sense. And you're in S234, it makes some incremental changes to move forward, like the ag soil mitigation at airports. the suggested NRB study of ag on-farm accessory businesses and forestry language, excuse me. But it also expands Act 250 jurisdiction with the road rule, and expansion of any Act 250 criteria without a comprehensive structure in place is not something the governor can support. But we do support the incremental notwithstanding language, which is similar to the CPG process with the Public Utility Commission, where the PUC approves a certificate of public good on the presumption that all other requirements and permits have been met. So that I can provide you with that notwithstanding language too, if you would like for the record, I mean.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Again, there are a lot of increasing pressures and complexities that we're facing on a variety of fronts. There's not a day that goes by without a headline or another story about the immediate need for more and more affordable housing, economic development, health initiatives, climate change, environmental justice. We support that a study committee of Act 250 governance or other committee work over the summer to build a thoughtful and comprehensive way forward that is not only a practical approach, but will also ensure greater success than, for lack of a better way of putting it, jumping into solutions for all of these variety of land use issues that are in play right now. And just to step back again to the governor's focus on prioritizing ARPA and IIJA projects, we also drafted language for the committee to consider that exempts ARPA-funded housing, PHPs, and the NDAs and downtown centers and the like from Act 250. This language would also include Act 250 exemptions for transportation and other infrastructure projects in the IIJA funding. And we built in a sunset provision for 2027 in this language. And again, I'd be happy to share this language with the committee if you would like, for the record.
Yes, please.
Okay.
And, can I ask one question? Because I think I'm hearing something new. And so I just want to make sure I'm hearing it correctly and understand it. We had been talking about the pressures of, well, we have the pressure of wanting to do more housing. Everyone's seeing that one front and center. And then we're saying, okay, we have this unprecedented flow of money in the form of ARPA dollars that creates a timeline where by 24, 26, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
So we got that one. But today I'm hearing you say IIJA. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is another driver of the administration's desire for reform. And I don't think I've heard that before. So I don't really know what the implications of bringing that money and act into the conversation is now.
Oh, because some of those projects would be subject to Act 250 permits. And what we're saying is that we would like that language would, like with the AOT language that's been suggested, would help move those more quickly.
Okay. I'll need to learn more for sure here. We'll need to learn more.
Okay.
My impression was that IIJA dollars can be expended out to something like 2028. So we're.
I need to check that.
It'd be good to know what that is, because if we're talking about the next 6 years, then I think that the timing, the amount of pressure exerted by that timeline, I think would be less than having to commit by 2024, for instance.
Yeah,
the ARPA money.
right. My understanding is ARPA and I will double check this for you, Senator, that it needs to be obligated by 2024 and that IIJA needs to be obligated by 2026. And then there are a couple years forward after that for actually completing the projects.
Right. Okay, so 26.
And I will,
28. Yeah.
yep, I will definitely verify that.
Right. Okay, so well,
Okay.
thank you for that.
Okay, and I just wanted to say in that language, if you want me to share it with the committee on the record, is also a sunset provision built into it so that we have an opportunity to look at it and measure and get, collect some data about what works and what doesn't, that type of thing.
Okay, sure, that would be helpful. I think, we've been talking about the concepts, and so it's great that you've put it into, thank you for putting it into writing, and I think it's the right time to bring it into committee and
Okay.
Have people read through and start to analyze it as a group. So
Okay. So there are a mix of provisions in 234, but it's not a comprehensive reform of Act 250. And at this point, the administration is saying that it cannot support it. And speaking on behalf of the NRB, we had 500 permit applications last year, and we issued 442 permit decisions. So with incorporation of new criteria and the expected increase of Act 250 applications, both under ARPA and just in general, because people are coming out of the pandemic and starting to do more work. The jurisdictional, it's a daunting prospect for our team at the NRB. And as Deputy Secretary Genrin was saying earlier this week, our capacity is really already stressed. And as you know, or may know, that we're in the process of hiring for 4 vacant positions and preparing for the anticipated increase in activity due to the ARPA and ARPA funds.
okay,
So I want to end by acknowledging that this is probably not the news you wanted to hear, but Act 250 is in my opinion, is too important to Vermont, to its people, to our heritage, and most importantly, to our future, to not give it the comprehensive restructuring and forward thinking that it deserves. And I thank you for your time this morning.
okay. Well, thank you. Let me pause and see if there's any committee questions. I have some. Senator McDonald.
We were just given some statistics about the number of permits that were applied for and granted in the last year. And I don't know whether we're talking about the last 12 months or since 6 weeks ago.
Thank you. I should have said that calendar year 2021.
So applications that have come in October, November, and December, maybe as recent as 6 weeks and haven't been resolved yet. Is that?
So those numbers I gave you were for all 12 months in 2021, 500, and the applications received and 442 decisions made. I don't have the numbers for the first 6 weeks of 2022, but anecdotally speaking, okay.
If an application came in December of 21, it might be only 6 weeks or 7 weeks old.
Correct.
So perhaps it'll be done by this afternoon or
correct.
2 months from now. Is that correct?
Correct. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. Senator McCormick.
Yeah, thanks. Although you serve at the pleasure of the governor, your role is quasi-judicial, and usually in the manner of a judge. The chair of the board does not actually speak for the administration, but it sounds as though you are telling us where the administration stands on this.
I am.
So the governor doesn't like it.
The focus is entirely on getting these dollars out the door. And you know, the ARPA and IGA, and he wants to make the efforts to have a process in place that we don't leave any money on the table.
Okay,
Mr. Chair,
yes, Senator McDonald?
this absolutely no reflection on the witness's testimony, and I thank her for her candor. But what we, in practice, what we're being suggested is that there's some people outside with suitcases full of money, and there are only so many rooms at the inn. And do we, people with suitcases full of money, get to the head of the line? Or do we treat applications from the citizenry or from whoever based on their merits? And that's not a situation that the witness today is outlined. Those are my words. So thank you.
We are discussing internally processes and operations that will treat applications the same way, whether they're the same old Act 250 application or if they're ARPA. And they'll be, I don't want to say dual tracks, but that each will move forward quickly. And that's what I meant. That was my intention with those comments, that they will get. That's why we're asking for the additional personnel for the next 3 years, is that that there are no log jams with the amount of permits that we're expecting. That's the best way to put it.
Much more comforting, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Right, and as I understand it, you already have in your authority to, have sort of a housing lane and a all other business lane, sort of.
Well, with PHPs, that's true, obviously. I mean, but yes, and I am not here long enough to answer that accurately. And if we would like to ask Allison, who's here, to explain that, we can. It's up to you.
It's okay. I mean, I think you're sorting out how you run your shop, and that seems like a totally perfect thing for us to inquire about, but not, get into any kind of micromanagement over. So thank you for keeping us informed. I am a little concerned about, hearing about IIJA for the first time, because I'll just be very direct about it. It feels a little like moving the goalposts. If we were looking out to feeling the pressure through 24 and accommodating things, and now we're hearing about something that will put pressure on through committals and all the way out to 26, it starts to feel like more and more leverage against the current system, a longer ask. But I think if we can stick to the sunset around 27, that could be retrospective for the ARPA block of money, maybe. I think that would be helpful. The other thing I just wanted to inquire more about is the notion of comprehensiveness. So it's a two-edged sword. Things become too comprehensive. They become burdensome to the NRB and others to try to figure them out, while at the very moment that you're also short on staff and hiring in order to deal with all the business coming through the door. But I don't really understand then the extent of what would make this more comprehensive, but not too burdensome. So can you help us understand better the notion of we're a little short on the comprehensiveness side?
Yeah.
Maybe that's just the kinds of the language that we haven't yet formally reviewed in committee, or I don't know what.
Yeah. What I mean by comprehensiveness is that there are a lot of different fronts on environmental issues and land use issues. and governance issues and policy issues. And that what I was trying to say is that we do have a finite amount of time to focus on the ARPA dollars. And let's take the time to look at and build a structure that will serve Vermont going forward. And with all of these not new, but competing pressures that are in front of us.
Okay. Well, I'm still a little fuzzy I don't know what, if this is a recipe, what are we not putting in the recipe yet? If 234 is a recipe, what do we need to add to the recipe that makes it more comprehensive? I guess that would be another way to phrase it.
Right. I just, with the focus is on ARPA for the governor, and I feel like that there's the timing of making these decisions between now and crossover is short, and I don't know that it can be successful, basically.
Okay. All right. Any other committee? So the other, for instance, you alluded to some language, I think, and in the conversation Senator Westman and I've had with you and Deputy Secretary Gendron, there have been discussions about other language. So do you want to, couldn't you submit anything that you feel is sort of ready for committee discussion to Jude? And I don't know if you have that with you now or could send it to Jude, and we might discuss it this morning, actually.
Okay. I would need a little more time, but
Yeah.
I will definitely get it to Jude as soon as possible.
Okay. All right. I just didn't know what, so whatever works.
Yeah.
We could go to Mr. Shoup and then come back or something like that. If there's anything you feel like, well, this is ready for a discussion. Okay. So
Okay.
any other, thank you for that.
Thank
Anything
you.
else you want to share before we hear from Mr. Shoup?
I'm not at the moment. Yeah.
Thank you. And any committee questions for Chair Haskell? Okay, seeing none. Mr. Shoup, good morning. Thanks for coming back. We're live in the editing room on the bill, place you've been before. Thanks for returning. And I had also reached out to VNRC, Mr. Shoup, Mr. Fidel, Mr. Groveman, and said, shared the committee's concern that we've been mulling over in the last 10 days, week, to say, how well are we supporting forestry? The housing conversation has, none of us wanted to suck all the oxygen out of the room and leave forestry sort of orphaned in the second half of the bill. So because as we focus on all that smart growth and development in developed centers, how are we also, are we bringing as much creativity and energy to helping the green spaces away from the developed areas do better? So with that, Mr. Shoup.
Well, I don't have a lot of additional testimony to what I testified the day before yesterday about. I will say that the same urgency that exists with regard to spending ARPA dollars exists with the loss of our forest and natural areas in the state. Jamie Fidel and I reiterated some extensive data about the loss of forest blocks and habitat. Just a little bit of additional information. This is a little dated. A couple of years ago, we looked at real estate trends. We had a legal intern, and that person documented that between 2019 and 2020, there was a nearly 60% increase in raw land sales in the state, and a nearly 70% or over 60% increase in the price of raw land. Anecdotal information suggests to us that has continued, if not intensified. So we do have climate migration is a real issue. COVID migration is a real issue. It's occurring in the state. So we consider the same that the committee and that the administration should treat the loss of our resource lands and our forest lands with the same urgency that we're treating the need to spend ARPA dollars. And this is an issue that is certainly not new. We've been involved in these jurisdictional discussions seemingly forever. I remember we spent a lot of time in this committee when actually we were in this committee room with different cast of characters, a different chair, and exploring all of the same kind of questions that you're looking at today. We looked at whether there should be locational jurisdiction using mapped resources, mapping technology being far more accurate than it was when Act 250 was passed, whether we should look at forest blocks or riparian areas or certain habitats. And that was problematic to the administration and to the committee for various reasons. We looked at whether we should just tinker with some of the existing jurisdictional triggers, like the 2,500 foot elevation. The House did actually consider on the floor whether to lower that to 2,000 or 1,500 feet. That served to be problematic because it was a little bit of a blunt instrument, and it incorporated some high elevation land that wasn't especially fragile, like land above 2,500 feet tends to be. We looked at whether you should lower the number of units that triggers Act 250. Act 250 was originally 10 lots. In 2002 or 04, it was changed to 10 lots and 6 lots, 6 lots being in communities that didn't have subdivision regulations or land use regulations. So that had been done in the past, as Jamie Fidel had testified. The average subdivision that we're seeing is between 2 and 4 lots around the state. So most of the development, as we've documented, has not triggered Act 250. We continue to believe that the road rule that was in effect for over 20 years provides the best way to capture some of that scattered, fragmenting development that's occurring across the state. And I believe it will have the impact of not necessarily bringing a lot more development into Act 250, but changing development patterns on the ground by having people subdivide their land in a way that doesn't extend infrastructure as far across the landscape as it currently is, by keeping the roads and driveways shorter, closer to existing infrastructure. I also, from a workload standpoint, I do want the committee to know that we have weighed in support of the governor's proposal to create several temporary positions at the NRB to help move projects along, anticipating a larger or an increase in applications. And we think that's a great idea. And if there is capacity issues with the agency or with the NRB, I think that we would certainly support providing additional capacity, whether on a temporary basis or permanently. We have raised a concern before that there's been there has been kind of not a strangling of capacity at the NRB, but a loss of capacity. And we do think that every district commission should have a coordinator, and that they should have the staff necessary to process applications in a timely manner. And we think that the NRB, despite some of the capacity issues that they have done, the district commissions have done a really good job. The statistics say that the average, I'm not going to, that it's not a onerous process or a timely, that applications have been issued in a timely manner for the most part, and the NRB's own statistics document that. So, we return to, there is an urgency with the fragmentation of our resource lands. That's going to continue, if not intensify. Of all of the different triggers to address that in the rural areas of the state, which are not being addressed now, we feel as though the road rule, the encroachment rule, as included in this bill originally, with a cumulative length of roads and driveway of 2,000 feet, would really be an effective strategy for addressing the issue. So
So that, just to make sure I heard the last piece right, that would be reverting to the road rule as we originally introduced it in 234.
at the chair's request, we looked at some other options to even tighten it up. Originally, the bill called for the cumulative measuring the cumulative length of roads and driveways at 2,000 feet, and that would get around the loopholes that existed when the road rule was in effect in the 80s, 90s, into the century. By adding the 800 feet of any single road or driveway, that would capture more development. That would be better. I know that caused consternation with the administration, and we think that the 2,000 foot cumulative measure would be adequate, would be effective.
Okay. Thank you for that update. Any questions for Mr. Shute? So we're not quite at the point of, like negotiating a bill, but I think we are. So I think one of the things we have additional language that Chair Haskell has for us to consider that moves the bill in their perspective to something more comprehensive. Thank you, Mr. Shute, for offering some feedback so that if we were to modify the road rule to something less, make it a less sensitive trigger, but still respond to the most sort of intrusive projects. So my Google mapping exercise for how far is 2,000 feet? So start out in front of the State House on the crosswalk.
Is this the one that goes from the State House down to the Italian restaurant, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, well, it wasn't quite accurate, so I took a new route. I went.
It was a different one. Okay.
Yeah, go to the first corner, take a right on Taylor Street, go to the bike path, get on the bike path, cross the North Branch, cross Main Street, past Sarducci's. You'll be 250 feet past Sarducci's by the time you finish your 2,000 foot driveway. So it's not the average person's driveway, and so that's today's Google Map game. At any rate, so when
So this seems, Mr. Chair, if I may, so this is
Yeah.
going to be the real decision point, right? I mean, that's
Right.
where it's coming down to the road rule. Is there a compromise there? Is it something that, and okay.
So let's think about this as a committee, because we're going to put forward a next draft. This is where the committee needs to be in alignment or at least a majority of the committee in alignment, that if this is the kind of thing that helps us broker a deal, basically, is the committee comfortable with reverting to the original 2,000 foot measurement in the road rule as it existed in 234, I don't know, a week ago or something like that? Anyone object to doing that? I don't know how to read Senator McDonald's gestures. That's a thumbs up. All right. Thumbs up, I can read. Okay. So in the next
Okay,
draft.
Mr. Chairman, what
Yeah.
are the alternatives here you're offering? I mean,
So
I would want to be triggered with as short a driveway
right.
as possible.
Okay. So when the road rule was introduced in 234, it said 2,000 feet of any combination of road and driveway. And then the subsequent revision, in part because I think we were feeling sort of the urgency to be working a little more assertively on force blocks, was a driveway of 800 feet or more, or combination of roads and driveways exceeding 2,000 feet. So this would delete the single 800 foot driveway provision and just say, by the time you get to any combination of road and driveway that exceeds 2,000 feet, that's when Act 250 is invoked.
And so that would allow for a 2,000-foot driveway.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. I hate to be an old curmudgeon, but I think it was fine the way it was. 800 feet made sense.
You mean what way it was when?
Mr. Chair, if I may, I think what it would be worthwhile having the committee do, because there've been a lot of different things coming at folks, what are laying out the actual sort of, this is where we are right now in statute. These are the possibilities going forward, just as a reminder to everybody.
Yep.
That's what I'm reading.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll pause. Thanks on that one. Ms. Chakowski's here. So let's answer the question exactly as Senator Campion framed it up. Where are we currently in law, and what are the choices that we're contemplating making in 234 relative to the road rule?
Sure. So the road rule is not in statute. It did exist as a Natural Resources Board rule from 1986 to 2001. So it was previously part of the Natural Resources Board, their rule, but it wasn't in statute.
Which, just so we're on the same page. So during those years, Ms. Chakowski, what would trigger Act 250?
Not the language that's in your bill.
No, I that I understand.
Okay.
But when it was prior to not having a road rule, what was happening out in the field? Or when there was a road rule, I'm sorry, what was happening out in the field during those 80s, 90s?
So I can get you the exact language. It was 800 feet, but it was a slightly different trigger, and it was road. It was not driveway. Driveway was not included. So I can get you the exact language if you give me.
I see Mr. Shoup, I think, knows the answer to this.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, I believe that the road rule was actually enacted as a rule in 1982 and codified by the legislature in 1986. That's my understanding, and I certainly would defer to legislative counsel, her research. And Ellen was correct. It was a single road, which I believe was defined as serving 3 or more house lots of 800 feet in length. And that resulted in subdivisions with multiple roads of less than 800 feet, which was the flaw in the rule.
Okay.
That was then, just to continue along our timeline, then that was removed from statute.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you.
I believe it was removed. I don't remember whether it was removed when Act 250 was overhauled and the Environmental Board was eliminated, or if it was done when the 10-acre loophole was eliminated.
Yeah, it was actually, it was in 2001. And so there was a trade-off in the bill where the road rule was repealed, but for towns without permanent zoning, the number of subdivision lots that would trigger Act 250 was lowered to 6 lots.
Right. Okay. And now bringing us up to our options, as Senator McCormick started to sort of talk to us a little bit about. Ms. Chakowski.
What do you mean by options?
So it sounds to me that the chair is putting, correct me if I'm wrong, this might be for the chair. We have what are the options from which the committee might choose right now between what the administration is putting on the table and what our various drafts have referenced?
So S234 is introduced, use the 2,000-foot road or roads, driveway in combination. VNRC recently proposed, and some language that's in your current strike all draft that says a single road or driveway of 800 feet in length or multiple roads or driveway in combination of 2,000 feet in length. Those are the two current proposals I have heard, although I don't know if I apologize. I was the most recent suggestion a few minutes ago just to take out the 800 foot and go back to just 2,000 feet. I'm a little bit confused about what the conversation just was.
Okay, so if we're, if the road rule is being, we've already heard an objection to the road rule. So let me, one thing is not sort of throw VNRC under the bus here. The more sensitive trigger, adding the 800 foot provision in, I asked them to consider how might we make it a more sensitive trigger. So we discussed that, brought that in because we're feeling like forestry was getting a little bit of short shrift. So now we're learning that that more sensitive trigger is objectionable to the administration. So the consideration is, might we go back to the original formulation, which just said any combination of road and driveway that is 2,000 feet or greater, that invokes Act 250.
And just to confirm, Mr. Chair, if I may.
Yes, please.
Ms. Haskell, the administration is comfortable with that. Is that accurate? I look to you for all questions having to do with the administration. So I call it the Haskell administration now.
Yay. Senator Campion, I would respectfully ask if I can get back to you on
Okay.
that. Thank
you. That would be great. That would be really helpful. Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Okay.
That's very helpful, that back and forth. Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks for pausing us to help have that conversation. So I think, if I were as a committee looking to then consider further changes, we've added a few things. For instance, an airport provision. We added a study on ag innovation business. We have the study on designations. We've included, I can't remember if we added the environmental division additional judge to facilitate appeals. What we haven't added off that sort of checklist towards moving towards comprehensiveness is there's some notwithstanding language, which even if we don't have it in front of us, maybe Chair Haskell can talk to us a little bit more about it. And so if someone said, what do you mean by that? My understanding is that it's designed to bring greater certainty or reassurance to the process without lowering any performance thresholds in terms of meeting all the permits required before an Act 250 permit is issued. So can you talk about how that would work? You were referencing, for instance, the PUC does something like this, and I think the committee's not familiar enough with that PUC process to know what it involves.
Sure. And if you don't mind, I would love to ask Allison to join in this conversation.
Sure. Please.
Okay. Allison, could you do a explanation of the notwithstanding language?
Sure. Do we want to pull that up or?
If I think probably knowing how we have people in different technologies in different places, if you can do a screen share and we can see it together, that'll be the most helpful.
Okay.
I don't know if that's possible. I mean to like sort of pop that question out of the blue for you.
Do I have screen sharing? Okay.
Yes, that will.
Here we go. It's in green.
Okay.
Host disabled participant screen sharing. I can send it to Jude. It's telling me I don't have authorization for
Yeah,
this.
same here. Yeah.
Jude, have you made them co-hosts? Okay, there you go. Ms. Stone, you should be able to screen share now. And same for you,
There we go.
Chair Haskell. Okay, great. Ms. Stone, can you zoom in a little bit? It's on the small side.
Yes.
Sorry to be doing this on the blue. As I understand it, the administration uses Teams, and of course, they can't be identical. They have to do it in their own way.
I don't know. Sorry, I think the pictures of you all on my screen may be impacting. There we go. They were covering the Zoom.
There we
There we
go.
go. Thank you.
That's great.
Probably go even a bit more. Okay, so I mean, the general idea was to emulate the PUC model where the PUC sometimes issues permits. I think we talked about this last time we were in here briefly, but the PUC, or last time I was in here, the PUC issues certificates of public good contingent on collateral permits from A&R and others being issued prior to some date that's set. Usually it's construction. Sometimes with the PUC, it's prior to operation of a energy generation project, but that way you can get your permit from the Public Utility Commission a bit earlier in the process, which I know in the PUC context can be helpful for obtaining financing. And so that can help expedite the process for the developer to some extent. Certainly the time it takes from application to getting your certificate of public good is faster if you don't have to wait on the ancillary permits. I think it was pointed out last time we heard that the developers still would need to get those other permits, and whether that impacts the larger timeline, I guess is a question for you all to consider, but or maybe get some other testimony on. But this is how it was proposed. The 10 VSA 6085 F would be modified to say that if an application is being processed as a major, that the application, if it's being processed as a major, then this you couldn't get your permit issued contingent on the collateral permits. But if it is being processed as a minor pursuant to 10 VSA 6084 B2, the commission could issue the permit under this chapter, subject to the issuance of any presumptive permits, typically from A&R, that were relied upon by the applicant, provided that any such Act 250 permit would include a condition or conditions requiring, 1, that all presumptive permits shall be obtained prior to commencement of construction of improvements, and 2, if the issuance of a presumptive permit requires a material change to the proposed development, such material change shall require an amended Act 250 permit prior to commencement of construction of improvements.
Thank you. And I suppose since the administration's bringing this forward, have you been engaged in conversation with the development community, for instance, or others, and they have suggested that this would be helpful to them? I mean, Ms. Stone, for instance, you alluded to the fact that a CPG could help an energy project go forward and get financing and shorten up their development timeframe, because they can work on the money piece while they're also working on getting the remaining outstanding permits. I don't know if you've had conversations, for instance, with the housing development community, and you're hearing a similar story.
No, Sabine, I see you shaking your head.
I don't think I am not aware of any of those conversations, Senator.
Okay. All right. And can you, so before I forget to say this, could you please send that language to Ms. Murkowski and also to Jude? That way we'll make sure every member of the committee has a copy. Thank you.
Yep.
So, Ms. Haskell, do you want to say anything more about this?
Not at the moment. I was just sending it to them. Sorry.
Okay,
It's
no
multitasking. I don't have anything else to add right now, and I'm happy to answer more questions if you have them.
Okay. Well, any committee questions about the notion of, I guess it makes the Act 250 process a little more parallel and a little less serial. Right, like you can.
Yes, it's a nice way to put it.
Okay. And for people who help us look out for unintended consequences that might be negative. So, Mr. Shoup, I don't know if you've heard about this concept prior to today's meeting or seen any of the language. I'm just sort of asking you to look over our shoulder and see if you see if you have any concerns.
Sorry. No, I have not seen this language. I would want to consult with our counsel at VNRC before I would comment on it. It's
Okay,
brand
of
new to
course.
me. Yeah, but as I understand it, maybe I could just to help make sure that I do understand it. So this would allow a minor permit to be issued before a wetlands or a stormwater permit. I guess is that correct?
Yeah, yes, but if you were relying on that presumption, but you wouldn't be able to construct the project until you got those permits from A&R. So if you couldn't obtain the permits that you needed, then you couldn't construct.
So I need to consider, I think before we would want to weigh in, would want to consider what the implications of that may be. One initial thought is I imagine there would be instances where it would change the design of the project in order to comply with the environmental permit from the agency.
And that's where there was some language in there, which I'm sorry, I stopped the screen share, but if the issuance of the presumptive permit required a material change to the Act 250 permitted development, then you'd have to amend your Act 250 permit.
Off the top of my head too, it raises the question of the criteria being aligned with the agency's criteria. There have been instances where Act 250 provided a backstop against a permit that was issued that did not, that a district commission found didn't comply with the Act 250 criteria. So I'm just thinking out loud of possible concerns. I'm not expressing specific concerns, but I do want to talk to folks back at the office.
Sure. Right. Well, thank you. We also have our own counsel here. So Ms. Murkowski, I don't know if you've, again, we're working sort of live real time. So as you look at that language, do you have anything you think the committee should be aware of? It's, that in terms of implications or consequences or things that might not be obvious to us on the surface, which sounds pretty much just, it sounds like a fairly straightforward way to help someone get the assurance of a permit being issued sooner, but the same number of conditions would ultimately have to be satisfied. So that sounds quite benign, but Act 250 is complicated. And so I'm asking you to help us think about what we might not be appreciating fully at this moment. And maybe that requires more time on your part too.
Sure. So I will say I do think this represents a significant policy shift. Act 250 is inherently different from the Section 248 process. Specifically, in the permits that are being referred to here are they have been granted rebuttable presumptions, as Mr. Shoup was just expressing, sort of relaying there. Permits that are submitted to meet the criteria are not always accepted. They can be rejected. That presumption is rebuttable. Also, there is case law establishing the holistic review aspect of Act 250, specifically in Hawk Mountain, sort of established this overarching principle that was embedded in Act 250 at its origins, which is that Act 250 has supervisory authority over all of the environmental matters within its purview. So even though there are other agencies that issue permits, the process that Act 250 goes through looks at the whole project. So issuing a permit before the other permits and the other work has been done does sort of conflict with how the Act 250 process works now. So there would be a significant shift, I think, in how the work is being done now. And I understand, I'll need to do some more review of this language since I'm just seeing it, but I understand it's specific only to minors, but that doesn't always necessarily convey the issues that come up in a project. And so it would be difficult for the district commissions to do this holistic review of the environmental issues on a project if the work done at A&R hasn't happened yet. So I do think it merits more research and consideration, but I do see some issues just immediately that you would want to just take into account.
Sure. Well, that is helpful. Okay, so I'm just thinking that we will need to take, so if you would spend some more time thinking about it and maybe inquire of the NRB, let's keep the conversation going. But I do see what I don't know is if you've issued that permit and then the permits come through, is there going to be a chance for the NRB to say, now that we see these permits, we would issue a different permit with different conditions? As Mr. Shoup was saying, it might cause some change to the design, and what's the threshold that lets that permit sort of be reeled back in, amended, and then re-offered, or whatever we call it. And I think that holistic piece is, thanks for pointing that back out. It's my impression that the only time where someone really looks at everything all together is in the Act 250 piece. Otherwise, it's people looking at their piece of the puzzle without necessarily appreciating the impact of the entire project. And the other language you have, I know that you're not ready to screen share and a walkthrough, but can you send us the language related to provisions around ARPA funded projects as well? Maybe you already have.
I was actually trying to, but it'll be there very shortly.
Okay, I'm a single tasker. I can't keep track of a chat bar most of the time while we're doing this. Okay, well, thank you. That's very helpful. Thanks for bringing more topics to the table, and we'll keep on working. I'd love to. So for the committee, when we have these other proposals, I'll make sure they circulate to everyone. And I'd like to be able to pick this up at the beginning of next week and start to, in the style that we just did on the road rule, turn it into a series of decisions for the committee to make as a group about what's in and what's out as we produce a next draft. I would love to see us stick to a schedule that has us vote this bill no later than the end of this coming week, a week from now, because we need to also move on to other bills. Senator Westman.
It would be helpful to me if Ellen could put together a chart that outlined this in chart form, what's in, what's out, and where the decisions are. It would just be helpful if I could
Great idea.
see it that way.
Yep. Thank you for that. I think that's a good idea. So, Ms. Murkowski, is that a clear enough sort of request, or do you?
No, I'm sorry. I didn't actually hear part of it. A chart of what?
At the decision-making process, what's in, what's out. We gave the list that, we've got airports in now, we've got the ag piece in, we've got so what, just a chart on a page
Okay.
with, and what the decision points are.
Okay.
Right. Thank you very much, everyone. Editing as a group is not an easy process, but it's what we do in order to finish developing bills. Okay. Thank you again. And before we say goodbye, I just want to double check. Is there anything else that we either came up in today's meeting or that you didn't get to that you would like to share with us before we sign off? Okay.
Just to thank you again.
All right. Thank you, everyone. So we're shifting gears. We're going back to S-148, the Environmental Justice Bill. One of our tasks is checking in with each operating area to see what kind of work they're already doing or would need to do in order to implement the S-148 or the evolving Environmental Justice Bill. It's just a check-in, and I met this morning prior to meeting with Joint Fiscal Office, and they will be reaching out to each of these same operating areas to ask them for budgetary implications. And because the funding section of this bill has to date been blank, entirely blank. Okay. So good morning, Commissioner. Good to see you again. Thanks for coming back in. So you just heard me explaining that we're reaching out to all the operating areas on S-148 and saying, where are you currently compared to what's contemplated by the bill? And if you can share an update, focus more on policy and implementation, and the JFO group will reach out to you on the what would it cost component.
Sure, absolutely. Good morning. Thank you for having me in. For the record, Josh Hanford, Commissioner of Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development. I've been involved in housing and community development work in Vermont for about 20 years. Probably seen over $300 million invested in, or overseen about $300 million invested in our communities for housing, economic, and community development projects across every community in the state, really. And I think that environmental justice, it may not have been called that in those projects, but was part of every one of them in a way, and under some review process. Much of the funding we manage is from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and we go through a 5-year process called the Consolidated Planning Process with an action update each year. And it actually has a section we have to address under environmental justice, as well as a number of other requirements. So I feel like the work we do, particularly like in mobile home parks, was called out in this bill. We have extensive data and reports on mobile home parks in the state, and where there are problems. We know where there are, communities in jeopardy of flooding and poor soils, and we have that information, and we try to address those as we can with various grants, programs, moving homes out of danger. It's hard to find replacement locations, and also, you have very low income residents that always can't replace their home without support. So I think that information is quite readily available. There's a number of UVM reports that have documented this. We have a registration program. We know every lot in the state. We know if it's vacant. We know if it's abandoned. We know if it's in a flood risk area. And we have a number of plans and reports to try to improve those communities. So I don't think the knowledge about what needs to be done and what could support people is missing in a lot of places. I think it's there. It's actually doing the work and having the options available and the funding to make those decisions that it gets in the way. Another area I think that is very well understood, but yet I don't think gets the attention it needs in today's current, priorities is excessive ADA work, American with Disabilities Act. we have a long history in my department of funding accessibility modifications to public buildings across the state. Just in the last 10 years, we've helped 49 communities make their libraries, town halls, community centers fully accessible. You know, the reality is back from 1992, the American with Disabilities Act, every public building in the state is supposed to have a plan to address accessibility for residents that have mobility. It's part of federal funding for transportation and others. You know, this includes everything from parking lots, you know, ADA accessible parking, entrances, walkways, elevators, bathrooms, the width of the halls. And our program has been one of the few that focuses on that. Every community that's ready receives an award. You know, we require a third-party review of the entire property to make sure we're not missing an aspect, because you had a lot of work done early on that was, they just put in an elevator, but they didn't fix the width of the hallways, or they just addressed the bathroom. So we've gotten very sophisticated in requiring third-party evaluations and architects to make sure if we're going to invest in these buildings, they truly meet all accessibility needs and get a sign off, because there's no sense in only doing half of the work. And this benefits so many people, you know, not just folks that have actual physical disabilities, but young families with kids in strollers, you know, elderly folks that, you know, that aren't aren't officially disabled, but have trouble with mobility. It's a win-win. It improves, but these are expensive retrofits to often very old properties and are very expensive. You know, the library in South Royalton was 5 years in the making, planning, and another several $1 million to make that library accessible. And so we do this work ongoing. And we think that addresses environmental justice in a way that is often, you know, thought about right now, how to make weatherization work, how to make, you know, solar panels. And, you know, there's a foundational issue that these public buildings need to be accessible to your residents first, before you add those other pieces. And it's even in some federal law that that's what we should be doing before we're investing other sort of, you know, bell and whistle sort of attributes to these properties. And so we're going to continue that work. We have lots of data about it. Vermont has fairly high disability rates across our communities, and we have a way to look those up, and it's automatically eligible for our federal funds. Another area is, you know, safe downtowns, you know, that are walkable, that are, you know, convenient for folks, transportation oriented. That is a lot of what our department does and incentivize. And so, you know, from my perspective, the environmental justice is critical, but it's about the important work that we do as much as framing it all up and counting it. And I think that, you know, the administration, you know, doesn't have any position on this bill yet. We're trying to learn it, trying to understand. I think definitely share the goals of what it's trying to accomplish. You know, I think that the devil's in the details. You know, is the 55% the right number? With our CDBG funds, we have a requirement that 70% of our funds benefit low and moderate income people over a 3-year running total. And any given project, 51% of the beneficiaries has to be low and moderate income. You know, I don't know all the funds that would count towards that 55%, what that costs. You know, I think another big issue here is to get this right, the time it takes to do this work, you know, setting up 2 councils and having them coordinate. You know, I must tell you that probably 6-7 years ago, a new secretary into the agency, our agency of Commerce and Community Development, did what was called a report on reports and a study on commissions and boards, and found that our little small agency alone, we were responsible for being on and staffing 2 commissions or boards for every single staff in our agency. So there's a lot of people spending a lot of time on commissions and councils that overlap. And I'm not sure how that's all coordinated. And when you get to that level of work, is the value lost in actually implementing what we all say and we know we need to do is something that I struggle with. And, the time commitment, and if you really want to empower the actual folks that benefit from most of this work and not just put more people like me on a commission, the current process of having, $50 a day to compensate people's time for, lengthy days and processes to get the real people impacted by this environmental injustice, that's a challenge. People are busy, they have jobs. And so I think there's a lot of, structural aspects of just how you get this done with this bill that needs some time to figure out. Is really my quick assessment of where we are. But yes, Senator.
Oh, thanks. Thanks, Mr. Henry. Is it okay, Mr. Chair? You were.
Yes, I was writing, so I didn't see you. Go ahead, please.
So do you have specific recommendations in your testimony, Mr. Hanford, as to changes? Because what you're saying is interesting and important. We want to get work done. How do we do it? Like you said, getting you on another committee might not actually advance it. And I appreciate the straightforwardness. Do you have specific recommendations?
I don't right now.
Okay.
We as a group, leadership with A&R and others chatted about this. We've looked at these elements. Certainly value the goals of this bill. I don't want to get that wrong at all.
No, I understand, and I appreciate that you're trying to sort of cut through and how do we achieve what we're trying to achieve in maybe a different way. The other piece that, if I may, I just want to go back to is when you said that Vermont has a high percentage of Vermonters are disabled. That might be new information, for me. Do you have a sense of where we are? I'm just curious compared to other states, and whether or not, this really isn't in your area and it's something I can pull apart with others, but do you have a sense of where we are compared to other states?
Yeah, I'd have to look, but
you don't need
I'm
to.
surprised.
I can
obviously.
jump into it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so we get this information from the HUD census data that they provide, and they do a breakdown of every community, the income levels of the households that live there, as well as the disability rates, ethnic, makeup, the best they can. And it's often surprising to see the numbers of folks that the percentage that they classify as having a disability of some type in our communities. And what I can tell you is it tracks very closely, the high numbers track very closely with the communities that are the lowest income, that have the most other challenges. And we know this because those are the communities we focus our community development dollars towards. That's the point of the community development grant program, is to largely benefit those communities with the highest needs, and all those factors weigh into our decisions. And I would be guessing, but I just, in the risk of guessing.
That's helpful. That's helpful. And it's something I'll jump into a little bit just to make certain that I have all the information I need. Okay, thanks very much for that.
Welcome.
Yeah.
The only one, I guess you did have a recommendation, question in there. The only one recommendation I could be certain about is the time frame to sort of get this done and set it up as it lists now is probably not enough to do this right. However the structure is, it takes a long time to get these things set up, appoint people, get someone to serve. I understand the urgency. I would argue, though, that doing it wrong because you tried to do it quickly doesn't solve the problem. That would be a clear recommendation in my mind, that there's more time needed.
Okay, thank you.
Right. And since the time that the draft you may have last seen, there have been revisions just as of yesterday, for instance, to try to enhance the process, to basically to go slower, to do it better, so that the end result is more meaningful. Because no one is interested in just checking a box here. I think there's genuine shared interest all the way around. I also appreciate you raising the point that although the terminology has changed, that this has been a long-standing concern. For instance, our weatherization program, the strongest weatherization program in the state, has been low income since its creation. So, and that's decades of work.
And I'll just add one other point to that. For our HUD funding, we have to perform an environmental review under NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act. It's actually on behalf of the communities, because our funds go to the communities. We help them get through the process. And, part of that lengthy process reviews all state laws, federal laws, the impact of the project on the people that live there, the impact of the people on a project. And there is a component of environmental justice built into that review for those federal funds. And it's often, sometimes it works at cross purposes. Like if, our goal is to build, affordable housing and we have this one location, well, that location could be near transportation centers, train tracks, others. And part of the environmental justice review suggests you shouldn't be putting those there because they have an impact on the people that live there. But yet from a practical economic perspective, and you want people to live near transportation centers because it's easier for them to get to work. So there is this, I don't know, it's a legacy from what we've done in the past, or, just leftover, environmental pollution from some of our past practices that I find interesting, that it puts some of our goals at odds with each other when I really don't think they should be. I'm not a environmental, expert. I'm not a scientist, but I find projects that I see caught up in this circular process of, well, we shouldn't put it there. It's got this environmental impact that's negative. And then from my community development hat, I'm like, but that's where we're told is the best place for people to live. So I just throw that out as something that's complicated about this work sometimes.
Right. Does that mean that you end up seeing a lot of brownfields projects?
We do. We fund a lot of brownfields cleanup projects.
Yep. Okay.
And, one example, I don't know if folks are familiar with, Richmond, Vermont. There was an old creamery there that had all kinds of bad stuff in the ground, and we cleaned it up and we helped the developer build some housing and some mixed use properties there. And, it was near train tracks, much of that. And the developer was responsible for cleaning up the pollution caused by the railroad, all within the right of way. And they felt it was really not their responsibility to clean up, impacts caused by the railroad. And we see that situation come up all the time. But yet, in order to put people there, we needed to clean it up. And it was a cost to the housing development, not the railroad, to clean up that leftover pollution. So
Right.
It's a real life example all the time of these sort of push and pull.
Yeah. I mean, there is the a tenant in law of cost causer pays, but except for when they don't,
Mhm.
and we're not, and that seems like, especially when it comes to pollution, we're not necessarily delivering the bill to the cost causer.
Yeah.
I think you were mentioning that you already do this work, and thank you for that. One of the things we found is that for us as a committee, we've had a look at our process a fair amount, and because by virtue of when we meet, how we meet, et cetera, we end up excluding some of the people that we would most like to hear from, unless we get out for a public hearing in the evening and someone doesn't work nights. So have you been thinking about, and the bill contemplates community engagement process becomes a more explicit component. Have you given any thought to that side of things, or do you feel like the verbiage might be different, but you already have a community engagement process that fairly successfully engages the disadvantaged, I think in the language of the bill, it's overburdened or underserved communities or environmental justice populations?
That's a great question. And I feel that we constantly need to improve our processes because a lot of them are outdated and antiquated. We have to do a lot of public participation and outreach for our federal funds. and it's very prescriptive of what we're supposed to do. Minimum of 2 public hearings and X, Y, and Z, and post it in the newspaper. It doesn't adequately gather the voices of folks that should be heard. And so we're trying new approaches. I think, we're in a Twitter tweet world these days. People are busy. They need to find out whether it's something they should pay attention to in one sentence. And our systems are way too complicated, legal language. It really turns people off. So we're thinking about doing more public participation and engagement through very, very basic language surveys of saying, hey, if you had choice to spend money on X, Y, and Z, what would you pick? And put it out through social media channels targeting the populations we think are not being heard from and engaged. Because the folks that come out and engage are the ones that have a problem with something. That's what we always hear. The folks that need to be heard, they're going about their day. And if there isn't some threat in front of them, they're not taking the time out to go to a public meeting and testify. And we've tried public meetings in the evening, middle of the day, every far-flung corner of the state to try to get it. And you really only get the same 5 people. So I think the future is a different approach to engaging those folks that is much more bring it down to a common level that people understand and keep it simple. And, that's how we're going to get the real feedback we need.
Okay. The other thing you mentioned that's, I don't know, that's entirely novel, but you were talking about stipends. So when you're working full time, it's a serious matter to think about getting permission from your boss to leave for something and then giving up the income you would have had for the time you're away. So it's a real limitation on participation. So have any of the projects that you have managed or has come through ACCD included stipends to help people who financially and time-wise have trouble participating, to basically fund them to be participants?
We do, but it falls under the limits that the state has. So it's a $50 per day per diem and then reimbursement for mileage, which again, I think favors those that have the professional jobs that can participate. They're either in the same field, and so it's expected that that's something you can do for your work because it contributes. And I think that's what we're wrestle with here, is that a lot of what we have in place is sort of hasn't been touched in decades as far as what those rates should be and how to really reimburse people for their time if you want their input. I must say, with the virtual meetings that we've been able to do a quick meeting and not take up someone's half a day. It's done in an hour, but we have to also reduce the sort of level of discussion, because people can't be on a Zoom board meeting all day long. They sort of max out at a half a day. And so it's a learning experience right now of how to do this. But I think there is something to, if you want to engage folks that don't have a way to cover their costs from their professional job, it's going to take a different approach.
Sure. We see the same thing too, I think, in some of the workforce training programs. If you want someone to go get training in advanced heating technology or something like that, or weatherization techniques, paying people maybe not their regular wage, but something to go spend the day learning about it. Efficiency Vermont has found that an effective way to get more people to participate.
One group that's been successful, I think, and hearing from a lot of folks, is like the Council on Rural Development when they do their community visits, which I'm often involved in. A lot of our staff is, and they do it in the evening. They provide dinner, they provide childcare, and they let people self-select, which sort of topics they want to go to. So there's a model there, but it does take a lot of infrastructure to pull that sort of work off, and a lot of people. there's a lot of people like me that go to those meetings, that's part of my job. So I'm able to go and assist them. They're not paying me to be there and help them. And they have a lot of folks that participate that way. And that's a big part of how it works. But they're able to engage those communities, and a big diversity of people come out because they feed them, they give them a program that has value, they offer childcare, and they do it in the evening. That is something I think that can be built off of. This obviously during the pandemic, a lot of that stopped or went virtual, but
Okay, well, great. Any committee questions for Commissioner Hanford? Right. Well, thanks very much. It's been helpful to have you in. Good luck on maybe reducing the number of commissions you're part of. I'm saying that as a joke, but only a half joke. I mean, it seems as though for whatever reason, we're much better at creating additional commissions than we are at sunsetting them.
right. I think there was a sunset committee at one point or process, but I think it's sunset. So yeah, it's interesting. But thank you for the time and good conversation. Good luck with this bill. I hope we can be helpful down the road as you make decisions.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you again. Okay. So committee, it's 10 o'clock. We have a break built in. Then we're going to hear from some more operating areas. We're going to end up wrapping, I think, a little early before we go to the floor at 11:30. So Judah, can you take us? I don't know if we go offline for the half hour that we're on break or not.
We do.
Okay.
Mr. Chair.
Well,
Hang on, please.